we welcome everyone to a fantastic session that we have here with Steve, Raabe, Suzanne Etgen, and Kacey Wetzel. And you are in the session Well Begun is Half Done. Suzanne just put a introduction prompt into the chat, so please fill that out and let us know who you are, where you are, and your favorite behavior change tool. Let's go to the next slide to cover some housekeeping for our session. So everyone, the session is being recorded and it will be shared through the Whova or Wova, however we pronounce that app. Everyone's going to be muted. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat in Zoom, or even better, use the Wova app in the Q&A. And if you want to do an @Steve, @Suzanne, or @Kacey with your specific question, then we can follow up afterwards and make sure that all those questions get answered. Please update your Zoom box with your name, pronoun, and organization. You can hover over those 3 dots and select rename to do that. And if you're having any technical issues, please message the host, who is Liz Chidova. Thank you for running the technical show behind the scenes. And with that, I'm going to turn it on over to Kacey, who's going to kick us off in this fantastic, engaging presentation. Kacey, take it away.
Thanks, Julie. Great. So, well, I should have probably showed, thank you for the introduction. So, these are my colleagues, Suzanne and Steve, and we'll be walking you through a really cool tool today. So this is our pretty straightforward agenda. We obviously just covered briefly introductions. We'll be giving you a very brief behavior change 101. I just want to acknowledge that, learning about behavior change is, not the sole focus of this presentation. We do entire multi-day trainings on this. We're going to be giving a very short 101 training, because we've done a lot of trainings on these in the past. The focus of this today is actually to give you a virtual tour of a new tool called ChesapeakeBehaviorChange.org, and we'll actually test drive that tool and then have everyone ask questions at the end and share some next steps for how we're going to advance behavior change within the watershed. So really excited. This is the first time that we're sharing this publicly, so lots to discuss. So our bay, it's beautiful and it's big. 64,000 square miles, as folks know, drain within the watershed to the bay, and it has 6 states, the district, 18 local governments are within the watershed, and 18 million people, and that's growing every year. So we have a lot of folks and a lot of entities that we need to engage in order to advance the restoration of the Chesapeake. And to date, we've had a lot of really big strategies for how we clean up the bay. And some of those strategies have been really successful. Obviously, sewage plant updates, stream restorations, outfall stabilizations, green infrastructure practices, a lot included there, tree plantings, cover crops, and you name it, right? Lots of restoration strategies in place. And a lot of those strategies need to occur on public property. Some can occur obviously on private property, but that means engaging a lot of folks, right? And we know that 90% of the watershed is held in private ownership. So those 18 million people that we mentioned are 18 million individual decision makers that have a significant influence on how our bay is restored. So their impacts on a daily basis, the actions that they take, the decisions that they make, influence the health of the watershed. Their perceptions matter, their biases matter, their hopes and distractions matter. What they feel they need in order to adopt new practices or take actions matter. And it drives countless sort of individual decisions on a daily basis, what those perceptions are. And while some folks individually feel that they might not matter in the grand scheme of things, 18 million people in aggregate have a huge, huge impact, right? So how are we going to try and influence them? Well, back in 2014, and I hope folks have a good understanding of the Bay Agreement, but just very briefly for folks that don't understand what the Bay Agreement was, there's been 4 Bay Agreements. It is the approach for how we're restoring the watershed. The governors of the states and the mayor of DC sign on to this agreement along with federal representatives. And the agreements within or the goals, I should say, within the agreement are what drive our strategies for a restored Chesapeake. And in 2014, we had, for the first time, an engaged communities goal and a stewardship outcome. And what did that include? That included the language you see on the screen, increasing the number and diversity of trained and mobilized residents with the knowledge and skills needed to enhance the health of their local watersheds. And that was a really big deal because in the past, we've largely focused on the implementation of restoration strategies. So this was the first sort of acknowledgement within the agreement that we need to increase the number of people making choices that matter to the watershed and that are environmentally responsible, right? So we now have a driver within this agreement to actually focus on the human decision-making elements, right? So what does it look like to actually change behavior? I think folks on this call might be thinking, well, my organization, or I know that lots of other organizations have been working for a really long time to try and influence behavior. And it's really difficult to do, and it feels difficult, right? Well, we have a lot to learn from the public health sphere about how to effectively influence behavior. And one of the things that folks might be aware of is that there are folks on a curve. Within any given population, there's folks that might be early adopters, meaning that they only need a little bit of information or education in order to adopt a new practice, like installing a rain barrel or installing a rain garden or picking up pet waste. And so there's folks in social science that call that group on the beginning of the curve that you see here in green, the show me folks. They just need a little bit of information, and up to 16% of people could change their behavior. And that's wonderful, right? And then we have in the orange on the back end here, folks that are probably more likely opposed, right? They're not willing to change their behavior on the front end, and they probably need folks to make them change their behavior. So regulations and legal interventions are probably the best approach for folks that are opposed to environmentally responsible behavior adoption. And in the middle, we have this big yellow section, right? Folks that need more than education, but probably less than regulation in order to help them change their behavior. And looking backwards, and we actually have a lot of data on this that I won't bore you with, it turns out that most of us within our movement have been only covering the green folks or the orange folks. So we have been trying to influence behavior as a movement for a very long time, but we've mostly been doing education campaigns, high information intensive campaigns that try to give people the information they need to change their behavior. But with this information, we know that only a maximum of 16% of people will adopt a practice with just information alone. So we've been missing a huge group in the middle. The bulk of the population needs products and services and incentives and convenience strategies in order to adopt a practice. So those are the Help Me group. And that means, it's a really positive thing, because it means that we have a great deal of opportunity to influence those 18 million people that we were talking about. If we just change our approach, apply some social science theories and practices, we can actually engage way more people and move the needle on increasing stewardship within the watershed. So it's really exciting, and we've been working on developing a tool that will help us to do that. So I'm going to pass it to my colleagues who will actually walk us through that tool that's going to help us reach the folks in the middle, the Help Me folks.
Thanks, Kacey. That was a great overview and introduction. I just have to say that it has been so much fun to dig deeply into this with Kacey and with Steve, two colleagues that I just greatly admire. And I have to say that the work that we're going to discuss was done within the Chesapeake Bay Program Stewardship Work Group. Those of you that were on the opening with Karen Bislin this morning, she did a really great introduction of the Bay Program architecture and the work of the Bay Agreement, and the stewardship outcome and goal are one of the non-numeric goals in the Bay Agreement that Karen actually didn't touch on. And she didn't touch on it because this is like a brand new thing. 2014 was the first time we had any people, the people were an indicator or a goal within the Bay Agreement. So it's super exciting, but we had to start somewhere. And the first thing that we did after 2014 is to try to define what stewardship is, and to try to measure, where are we right now so that we can figure out how our strategies are working to affect change. And so the web tool that we're about to show you guys is all based on the stewardship indicator. And the stewardship indicator was a baseline measurement of some behaviors that I'm going to talk about in a moment, both individual behaviors, also some measures of voluntarism and civic action. And it was created to do two things, to baseline measure where are we now. The second is to help inform effective campaigns to increase stewardship actions. And we'll talk about how to do that. And then to share the data widely to help link best practices and behavior change. So the behaviors that we chose 19 stewardship behaviors. In case you can go to the next slide, 19 stewardship behaviors, and it was a whole consortium of folks that that picked these behaviors on a couple of criteria. The first is they had to be behaviors that were not emergent behaviors, not brand new behaviors, but behaviors that everyday individuals could take action on and were well known within the watershed. We did try to do behaviors that could be engaged depending on from people who both own their homes or rent their homes, people that live in urban areas, suburban areas, and even rural areas. So there's a range of behaviors. And we felt that this group of 19 was really representative of what we felt stewardship actions were at the time. There's some now that I'd love to, put on that maybe were emergent back then that maybe we think of now. But these are the 19 behaviors that were measured in the indicator. So if you go to the next slide, the measurement was taken in 2017, and it was a phone survey, wireless and landline. And Steve, my mentor and colleague, is the person who actually spearheaded these interviews and all of the great math behind them. So we have a statistically significant sample size across all of the Bay states and jurisdictions. And you'll see that there's a fun little oval in the middle, Anne Arundel County. Anne Arundel County, in collaboration with Chesapeake Bay Trust, actually created an additional sample of Anne Arundel County residents so that the data for that local region would be stronger when you drill down, right on the county basis. And we'll be talking at the end of the presentation about an opportunity for you guys to get your own statistically significant sample size when we run this survey again. So this survey, again, 2017, across the Bay watershed. And if we go to the next slide, we'll just refer back to the graph that Kacey described. And, this is the diffusion of innovations curve. And what I just want to say is that there's lots of different behaviors that we could all be working on there. Out there. And the tool that we're about to show you is going to help us do a couple of things when we're trying to figure out how to change the people in the middle. So if you go to the next slide. So when it was probably in June at about 11 o'clock at night when I was doing the the proposal to do this, and I had to come up with a 6-word title that would describe what we were trying to do. And I think Rose and I, my daughter, had just watched Mary Poppins. And so, you know, she says, well begun is half done. And that means if you start off on the right step, you will get far and you're almost done. And so the tool and the indicator data will really help us with the first 2 steps in the behavior change process. They'll help us select the right behavior. And I think as Steve's going to show you, if you select a behavior that, you know, is already adopted by your audience, or a behavior that people aren't likely to adopt, you might as well just be wasting your time. And then likewise to hone in on the right audience to prioritize. So those are 2 things that we're going to show you that this tool can help you use and this data can help inform. And it's the very beginning process of that behavior change, of developing a behavior change campaign. And as Kacey said, we're not going to go through in depth the whole process, but you know, in general, the first step is to identify your behavior, then you prioritize your audience, then you're going to learn about your audience and what barriers and what motivators exist, and then you create your campaign and you measure your campaign. But these first 2 steps are really critical, because if you don't get them right, everything else you do is a waste of time. And so, and this tool also, as Steve will describe, is not the only thing that you should use to select your behavior or your audience, but it can point you off in the right direction. Finally, before we leave this slide, a lot of people look at this data and they ask, well, can this data help us learn why people are likely to adopt a behavior, why they aren't already adopting a behavior? And I want to signpost that the why questions were not part of this survey. It's sort of different type of research, finding out the why. The why is really important, but it's not part of this particular data set. So this data set's going to help us with the who, the what and the who, but not quite the why yet. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a very short primer on the first 2 steps of behavior change: choosing the right behavior and selecting an audience. So choosing the right behavior, there are sort of 3 principles that we think about. I call them the Kacey Wetzel 3-legged stool of behavior change. So we want to concern ourselves with 3 things. First is impact. How much, what kind of an effect will this behavior have on improving water quality? And I should also say that this tool was developed under the Bay Program umbrella. And so the impact that we're talking about is really about nutrients and sediment in the Bay. I mean, there's other impact, you know, you could think of impact in other ways: impact on climate change, impact on habitat. But for our purposes with this tool, we're talking about impact on water quality in the Chesapeake Bay. So that's the first. The second is opportunity. How many people in your community or geographic area are not already engaged in the behavior? And this is important because you don't want to work on a behavior that everyone's already adopted. We've actually have several instances of people doing behavior change campaigns where they're trying to affect change in a behavior that most people in the community are already doing. So you really want to understand what your opportunity for changing behavior is within a behavior. And then last, likelihood. And this is, you know, how willing are people to change their behavior? There are certainly some, you know, areas, some communities or even geographic areas where the likelihood to change a behavior is very low. We know, for example, that in more rural areas, you know, picking up pet waste is not something that people often are very likely to do, or as likely as in more urban areas. So those are the 3 things, and Steve's going to touch on them when he goes through the tool. And this particular tool is going to be able to measure opportunity and likelihood. Impact, we're going to show impact, but it's not going to be numerically factored into a behavior score, and he will talk through that with you. So the three-legged stool of behavior change is there. And then going on to audience, these same three things, size, as a segment of the population, how small or large is your audience? Obviously, you don't want to do a behavior change campaign for a group of people that, is a handful. You want to try to affect a large segment of the population. So size is one factor. And Steve's going to sort of tell you a little bit how you can think of size. Opportunity, again, to what extent is this group of people not already engaging in the desired behavior? And then likelihood, how likely are they? So those are the basic principles around which we have to choose the first two steps of the behavior change process, choosing a behavior and prioritizing an audience. And with this, go right ahead. With this, I think Kacey's going to stop sharing her screen and Steve is going to pull up the actual website, which while he's doing that, I will just say that this website is hot off the press. It's not even off the press. You guys are the first people to see it, literally, and it's not even published yet. I think it's going to get published later this week. So Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Suzanne. We are very excited about this. So you're about to see the tool, and this is meant to be a one-stop shop. It is meant to be a place where practitioners can go and get everything you need to understand how to put together a campaign, how to choose the right behavior, how to target your audience, and also how to learn from others that have been going down the same road as you. This website that you are about to see, we believe is the first of its kind in the nation. We have looked a lot. Kacey can talk more about this and some other work that she's doing, but what we've got here in terms of the ability to mine this data set and the ability to have a case study database that's built in here so you can look at other people's learnings and successes and maybe borrow their tools. All of that is something that's unique across the nation in the world of behavior change. So we're pretty excited about this. We think it's path-breaking. Now, I want to give some shout outs to people that have helped bring us to this point. One is Caroline Donovan, who's here, who's on this seminar today, because way back when, in about 2015, I think, we worked together with some help from the Trust to develop the predecessor to this tool. And Caroline was very important in all those efforts to choose the behaviors that we were going to look at. And that was a process that others who are here with us today also took part in. The second group that I want to thank and recognize is the web team at the Bay Program, led by Guy Stevens, the heroic efforts of Dan Brelis, who put together a lot of the stuff that you're about to see, but others, colleagues within that web team, Caitlin May, I'm going to forget people, but a wonderful team, a very capable team of people with some help from Greenfin and their technical partner V4. All of them need to get credit for what you're about to look at. It's beautiful, it's very functional. And then finally, I need to recognize the Stewardship Work Group. Amy Handon, Suzanne, and Kacey have been co-chairing it. Some people who might be here today have been involved with it. So a lot of people have put their thoughts and intentions, and Kacey, who with Jamie Baxter probably envisioned this initially years ago. So it's amazing to see this come to pass. So let me just kind of quickly show you what we've got. And yes, somebody's chatting. I want to encourage you all to use the chat box while I'm sharing. I can't look at that, but other people can. My podcast partners here can help kind of look at the chat. So this website is meant to do basically these three things. You're going to be able to explore that big data set. You're going to have some assistance, including a stepwise way of doing it and worksheets to support that, and other resources and tools to help you put together a campaign. And then it has an ability to share what you've done. So you can create an account, you can upload your campaign materials and research and other things so that others can look at it and learn from it. So I'm going to take you to just a couple of tabs so you can see what's here. First, I want to show you the behavior change tab, because here we want to share with everybody the best practices that we're aware of in terms of putting together a successful behavior change campaign. So, for example, you have linked resources here that are going to be very useful for you. For example, Doug Mackenzie Moore's website, which is here. There's some other things, literature that you may want to read that will help you. I just saw Donald Trump. I don't know how he got into our presentation, but he was there for a second. But anyway, so there's good linked tools that you can take a look at. And then this, which is one of my favorite aspects, which is a step-by-step planning guide. So, I've been involved with a few of these efforts. You all have to put together a campaign, to have a best practices template of how we should plan and execute our campaign is something that we really wanted to provide so that it was simple and easy for everybody to understand. So you can go within these steps, and it's going to really guide you and your colleagues as you put together these campaigns. Important things to remember at the very first step of your campaign: to choose a single behavior, to make sure it's end state. These are all described here so that you can do a good job of getting off to a good start, as Suzanne was just describing. And then it describes some of these other factors that she just pointed out: opportunity, likelihood, and impact, what we mean by those. And so you're going to be able to go within. I do want to share a couple of specifics just to give you a sense of how this works. For example, under step 4, developing your campaign strategies. This part is really the heart, I suppose, of the development of how you're going to execute your campaign. So it's going to help you see what you need to do. It's going to give you some tools and take you through a process step by step, understanding how to link the tool that you select to the barrier that you're seeing with your audience, all here. And then implementation. So I did want to point out to you that you have the ability here to create an account so that you can go back, so you can post things. When you do, you'll be guided in a structured format so that your observations and experiences and tools and research products and whatever you have can be shared with other people and compared. So let me go there. So what's going to end up happening when you share is that you're going to populate this campaigns tag. Isn't this cool? Are you guys excited? Because I mean, it's amazing what this is. So you're going to be able to look within as this gets populated, and actually there's more here than there was. I haven't looked at this for a while. There's more here than was here a couple of weeks ago. So that's great. So this is going to eventually grow into a very large catalog, which will be searchable by things like location, the specific behavior. You'll be able to check off the behavior that you're interested in knowing more about, or audience segment, or campaign status. So where is this campaign, in terms of its development? You may want to look just at completed campaign, or you may want to look at all of them at their various stages. But then you're going to be able to go within a campaign like this Blue Water Baltimore campaign on rainwater harvesting and take a look at aspects of the campaign. Of course, my personal favorite, audience research, right? So all of these important aspects, lessons learned, which is something that we all need to know, are available for you here. So that's the campaigns tab. About the survey. So here you're going to learn about the survey tool, what was specifically asked, the methodology that was employed so that this can be replicated in the future. I do want to put in a little plug and emphasize something Suzanne said a couple minutes ago, which is, across the Bay watershed, when this survey was conducted, 5,212 interviews were conducted, but it was set up from the get-go with the idea that local jurisdictions or local watershed organizations or others who are wanting to compare their data to the Bay or to their state or to their region with greater statistical confidence could field these same questions in a modular way, and then that can be plugged in to this tool. So the Arundel data, which was fielded at the same time as the Baywide, through a separate effort has been added. And so people in Arundel can go in and look at a deeper data set around their own behaviors. And that opportunity, as we move forward into 2022, with plans and hopes to refield this freshly, there's an opportunity for those of you who want to amplify your local data set to be able to do that. So we can talk more about that. So the behaviors, the 19 behaviors, are stratified into some conceptual categories. You know, your dog, picking up after your dog, things that go down the drain, managing rain barrel, mainly through rainwater, mainly through rain barrels and downspouts directed towards planted versus impervious surfaces. Litter, both picking up other people's litter and not tossing litter. And then, of course, things in your yard. And there's quite a few things there that you can see on the list. So the entire tool is organized in those categories so that it's hopefully easier for you. So I want to go to the data. And this is where it gets either scary or exciting, you know, depending on your point of view, but we've tried to make it user-friendly. Now, Suzanne reminded me this morning that we should make sure everybody knows this is brand new. So much like SpaceX, you know, we're doing something that is really new and path-breaking, but also there are things that can go wrong. Hopefully nothing goes wrong with SpaceX. But when this gets published, you may discover that there's something that's not functioning properly, or maybe there's a usability issue that you'd like to see change. So we're very eager to get your feedback as you start to use this tool. And actually the Bay Programs team has built in this cool feedback pop-up, you know, that's down here in the lower right that you're going to be able to use. I'm not sure how to make it go away, to be honest with you, but there it is. X. So you're going to be able to give us and the web team direct feedback on what you're experiencing with this, or you can certainly reach out directly to any one of us. But and I don't want to take too much time. I want to give you a really quick intro so we're going to actually release you into breakout rooms in a few minutes and encourage you to actually poke at this yourselves and see what you think for a few minutes. And then we're going to come back together. That's what we're about to do. But let me just quickly show you. So for example, here's a behavior, created a rain garden. So we can click on that and see what the Baywide stats are. Here's opportunity, which Suzanne pointed out to you, and that is the opportunity is the opposite. It's the inverse of adoption. So this little wedge is people that told us that they have a rain garden. Now, mind you, rain garden is a concept that people misunderstand. And so being fallible human beings who didn't quite understand what we said, you know, some people overreported what they have thinking it's a rain garden. But the point is that 87% of the public knew that they didn't have anything that could be considered a rain garden. So that's a great big opportunity group. You have a big field to work with if you choose to work on rain gardens. Over here is likelihood of adoption. So in this giant wedge of 87% of the public, how many of them said they were likely to put one in the foreseeable future? The very likely group amounts to just under 6% of this opportunity group. And then you've got a somewhat likely group of another 17%. So that boils down into a score of 14 out of 100. So actually pretty low on the likelihood scale. And I think you all know that, you know, this is intuitive, but rain gardens are intensive, cost money, and require more of people. So it's a lower likelihood behavior, but potentially a high return behavior. So this score aggregates these two wedges together. It takes 100% of the very likely group, 50% of the somewhat likely group, and creates that score out of that, if that makes sense. And then we've assigned a low, medium, high environmental or water quality impact to each of these 19 behaviors. And there's a score that results. And the score is just the average of the opportunity and likelihood. But it helps you rank and think about how these behaviors stack up against each other. So you can click there and you can go into more detail around the rain garden. And here's one of the really cool aspects. You can segment this in all kinds of different ways. The survey has all these different indicators on it. So you're going to be able to do some really good audience targeting based on these sorts of things. So for example, we could look at income groups within the population Baywide, and you can compare the scores for both opportunity and likelihood of adoption of a rain garden within all of these different categories. And you can kind of cruise down the list and see if income is a driver of likelihood of adoption. And you can do that with all of these, so community type is urban, suburban, small town, rural, and people who wouldn't tell us. And so, you've got that. And then you've also got a geographical breakout, which has a lot of heft to it. So in the different states, in New York, we can segment the western part of the upper watershed and the eastern part, which is the Susquehanna going up. And in Maryland, we can segment all these different parts of the state. In Delaware, we can separate Kent County from Sussex County. And so our ability to segment is based upon how many interviews were collected in each of those areas. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about that right now, but with surveys, the confidence we can have in the data relates directly to how many interviews were conducted. And so you do end up with this strength of data score, which is our attempt to give you a sense of how confident you can be in the data. So for example, I'll quickly just bore down into Kent County, Delaware. And now all of a sudden, we're working with a much smaller sample size, and our strength of data score has gone way down. It's only fair. So we need to know that. And so you need to keep that strength of data in mind as you're looking at the overall data set. So I'm cognizant of the time, and I want to get us into our breakout sessions. I see there are a lot of chat messages. Is there, co-hosts, is there anything that we should address on those chats before we go into the breakouts?
No, I think you're okay, Steve. Suzanne answered the questions, lots of affirmations for the tool, and I have the breakout instructions in there.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so here's what we're wanting you to do. You're going to be randomly sucked into a breakout session with a pretty small group of people, and we will ask you to choose one person in your breakout to share their screen. So you should find in the chat the link that gets you into this tool that I'm showing you. Have we put that in there, colleagues? Yes, okay. So that's there. So you can get into this tool that I was just showing you, and you can navigate it yourselves. And some of you are probably already in there, which is great. And so we want you to then pick a second person in your little breakout who's going to keep notes, on what you do. And we've got 3 questions, and those are going to appear to you somehow, I think in the chat. Number 1, we want you all to pick a geography, just agree on something, a fun geography for all of you to look at, and then look at several behaviors on the list and see if you can choose one as a group that you'd like to work on together and figure out a reason why you chose that behavior based on the scoring that you see. Second, within that behavior, if you have time, take a look at some audience segments like I just did, kind of look at income or race, ethnicity, or gender, or whatever you want, and just kind of see what it pops out to you, because you'll see that sometimes there's big differences and there's some good audience targeting information. And then 3, we would benefit from any notes or thoughts you have about the site and how it works. You can't go deeply into that in a short breakout, but if you have any top of mind thoughts, we're going to come back together after 15 minutes. And then we're going to do a tiny bit of sharing, not a lot, so no pressure. Nobody has to share, but we'll do a little quick sharing. So with that, I want to pause. And so what's the process from here for getting them into the breakouts?
Liz Chadova is going to work some magic and break us into those breakout groups. Everyone, please take note of the instructions. There's also a link to a Google Doc that you can click on also for your small breakout discussions.
And the Google Doc is exactly the same thing as the instructions. So either one. We just want you to explore the tool and see what questions you have.
Have fun.
And I think if
usually
you
it
need
takes
us, you can call us. We'll try to flip ourselves around into the different breakout rooms too.
And it does take a moment to activate the breakout rooms. And just a reminder, if folks want to add questions into the Whova app, you can also do that. In addition to asking questions here in Zoom, I am copying and pasting things into Whova so that folks that view this session afterwards can see what you have asked and the answers.
All right, the breakout rooms are open.
A basic understanding of impact to reductions in nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And we gave it a high, medium, and low based on responses from experts in the field that work on modeling. And so that is what informed sort of a point scale for high, medium, and low impact. This is a placeholder in the tool, and we have a goal of actually attributing a value to reductions to each of these practices. And for some of them, we already have that information of what the reductions are associated with the individual installation or adoption of a practice. And for some of them, we do not yet have it. And so we are working on with Department of Natural Resources and other modelers that are, well, one key modeler is helping us right now. Her name's Sarah Lane. She's with the Department of Natural Resources, and she is working with us closely to attribute reduction value to each of these practices, which we will then marry with the likelihood data as well as the penetration rate data, which is opportunity in the tool, because penetration rate is not a commonly used phrase. And we will be looking at, we're in the process of doing a literature review and analysis of research that's happened all around the world on how to model adoption rate based on experimental design. So what that means, to use like layman's terms, is people across the world, Australia, Canada, the US, the UK, are designing experiments to see what causes people to adopt practices and what are the factors in the design of those programs that influence people to adopt practices. So like the number of times you engage with a person, the number of times you provide a product or a service offering, whether or not you collected information from your audience up front. So we're actually going to aggregate and analyze those research practices that have been designed in a scientifically appropriate way that we can then average those strategies, those variables in this research, and marry it with the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reduction values. And that's how we're going to create a modeled impact number. So it'll be based in science. Right now, it's partly based in science and partly based in a rudimentary understanding of how to just put them in categories of high, medium, and low. So it's a placeholder right now, but we're working towards an actual reduction credit. So if anyone has more questions about that, I'm happy to chat with them. And we're going to be kicking off a summary of that research and a broader discussion around impact on February 10th, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Great. There is a question in the Whova that I wonder if either of my colleagues know the answer to, which is how soon can people create accounts on our website? Do we know? Is that live yet? Or we don't know?
I think so. The process is that there'll be a soft launch. So I think when this thing goes live, I think they'll be able to do that. But we're not going to widely promote it, I think, for a little while until we get just a couple more people to use it. So you guys will be the guinea pigs. I think what we could do is when it does go live, Julie or Liz, could we send a message out to the people who attended this session just to say, here's the live link, you can now all begin? Is that going to be possible?
Yeah, you can always come back into the Whova app and then broadcast within your session chat and Q&A. That's probably the best bet. But yeah,
I'd like to address one other question I see in the Whova, which is, and I think we wanted to address this, so thanks for asking. The behavior score does not seem to factor in the number of people in a subgroup. How would that impact your interpretation of the behavior score? So great question. So, one of the things that we want to make sure, well, we want to authorize everybody who's using this tool to both look at the data, look at the scores that get generated, but then use your subjective judgment. One should not be a slave, to the numbers. So they're going to generate scores, but you're right. One of the things you need to look at is the size of these subgroups. And so if you get a super high behavior score, meaning this is a great behavior to work on within this subgroup, but the subgroup is very small within the overall population, well, then you're going to have some dialogue about whether that's a subgroup that you want to invest in. It might make sense for reasons of your local knowledge or whatever. It might be a high priority group that you've chosen, for example, an underserved population that you want to reach. So we want to encourage you to combine the scoring that you get out of this tool with your local knowledge of your communities, your subjective judgment about what's going to work. It's that marriage of the data with subjectivity and a little bit of your own gut that's going to drive this thing, right? Casey, you're
Absolutely.
nodding. You want to add anything?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add is that this is going to sound a little bit overly candid, is that we've been doing engagement and behavior change work based on pretty much nothing at all since the 70s. So, this data is a powerful step in the right direction to inform what we're doing, right? But it's not everything. Our work has to be based in the reality of what's happening on the ground and who needs assistance, right? And so I'm really excited to see our decision making be informed by information, since we've largely been selecting behaviors and audiences based on very little information to date.
I'll just make one quick add-on to that, which is that in our group, we were looking at Arundel County data, downspout disconnection in urban areas, and there was a behavior score of 50, which ranked pretty evenly with lots of other behaviors. But when you unpacked and looked at it, the opportunity was 100 and the likelihood was 0, which is how it came up to a 50. But you might not want to work on that behavior if there's 0 likelihood. So just make sure that you're not using, don't rely only on the combined score. Do look at opportunity and likelihood and just use them to help you think about your work.
So we're going to move to,
we have
go ahead,
two
Casey.
additional questions. Want to make sure we get to those as well. So there's a question in the chat from Baird. Does the tool give us insights into the reasons that some people might not adopt a behavior? And then there's another question from Renee. Is there a way to drill down into challenges faced for an initiative you pick?
So no, it does not give any answers to why questions. So that is not what this tool is designed to do. It gives you data on what people are doing and what they might do in the future, what their likelihood level is. And it's going to marry that with the impact data that Kacey was talking about a minute ago. What it does not do is tell you why. And it does not measure the impact of interventions like incentives or prompts or any of those other things you might do. That kind of stuff is done through a different form of research. So one needs to invest in an additional layer of your own research or read other people's research to get some of that stuff around reasons why and why not, and whether certain tools and interventions will work. I know we want to move towards our wrap up, and Suzanne, I think you're next up, right? You wanted to make a point.
Well, so I think Kacey's going to reshare her screen. I didn't know if couldn't hear the second question Julie answered, but I assume we got that answered in what Steve just said. And if not, we can answer it in the Whova app. But there are just a couple of things as we wrap up. We want to talk to you guys a little bit about next steps. And the first next step, as Kacey's pulling it up on the screen, is the opportunity for the next data collection for this data. So Steve, do you want to talk about when that's going to be and the opportunity to get a localized sample, just very big picture?
Yeah, so the data that we're all talking about today was collected in 2017, which is like an eon ago. And some of it hasn't changed much probably, but people have been engaged in behavior change efforts since then. And we hope that the needle's moved on some of these since then. So in 2022, the plan is tentatively, but very, very likely, we hope, that we'll recollect the same data set. We'll probably modify the questionnaire some to maybe look at some new behaviors. And that's all going to be done within the stewardship work group. So if you are part of that or not yet part of that, that's the venue where that discussion is going to occur. And so join if you haven't. But anyway, we hope to recollect in 2022. And as part of that, as I mentioned earlier, there's an opportunity for localities to add on to the sample. And so we're going to try to make that easy and modular and low cost. So we will be in touch with everybody about that as that gets closer.
Yeah, thanks. And I just put in the chat, Kacey, you can go to the next slide, but I just put in the chat the link to the stewardship work group, which is the next little thing. We do have a work group that consists of many people around the Bay watershed that is trying to move the needle on stewardship in general. Individual behaviors is just one part of that needle. That work group is meeting quarterly, and they help to inform the work of the Bay program around stewardship. If you are interested in learning more about the work group, I will repost the link, yes. But if you're interested in learning a little bit more, I will repost a link there, or you can just contact me directly and I can get you on the invitation for the next meeting, which is like the end of January. So hope you'll join us there. And then Kacey's going to talk about the last opportunity coming up in February.
Yeah, sorry for that not being seamless. I got kicked out of Whova right when you asked me to share my screen. So as I mentioned, there is a literature review and analysis underway that's going to inform impact measurements moving forward. That will be kind of critical to enhancing that component of behavior ranking and audience selection down the line. It's also going to just, for our purposes, you know, we're hopeful that we can start to create an annual space with which people can share what's working, what do we know is working worldwide to enhance stewardship practices, what are the gaps in research that funders like the Chesapeake Bay Trust and others can be supporting to fill that research gap, and you know, enhance our work collectively to increase stewardship practice adoption. So we're designing a forum. Suzanne's on the committee that's helping with that, and several others. And so this is a low quality graphic of a February 10th forum that's coming up. And we're really excited to have folks register for that. We will be sharing a registration link. We can do that as a follow-up to this presentation for those that are interested in learning more and joining in on the conversation moving forward.
Awesome. So we are at the end of our presentation. So Suzanne, the links are still not working. So if you all, Steve, Suzanne, and Kacey can populate the Whova page for your session with resources and answers to questions, that would be great. And it looks like, Suzanne, you just dropped a survey. Do you want to?
Yeah, so one last thing. So as we started off with, this is like the very beginning of introducing this tool. We want to know what suggestions you have and what additional help you need for behavior change campaigns. So there's a little form specifically for those of you that attended this sort of dry run, this first showing of the tool. So if you go to that form, hopefully you'll be able to populate some requests for additional information, training, resources, or what you think is helpful in the tool. And thanks for Kelly for adding that SPANA link. That's great.
And with that, Kacey, if you can go to the last slide here. Everyone, there is an opportunity to fill out a session evaluation by going to the Whova page specific for this session. So please fill that out. Hope everyone is finding their sessions okay. And thank you so much to Steve, Suzanne, and Kacey for an engaging, awesome session and an introduction to this much needed tool. With that, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your forum.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.